Okay, everybody, welcome. I'm Ron Donlevy, and I will be doing our Focus on Wellness webinar. And I'm going to go ahead and uh, share the PowerPoint. I know that there's a survey that we'll ask you to do at the end. And so I just need to get, that's not, let's see if I can share the right screen real quick. I am a counseling student. I have passed my NCE. I have finished my internship for the pretty much. That's all finished up, but I do need to finish another class before I apply for my license. And this has been scheduled for a while, so I'm really excited about it. So I'm going to start my little slideshow. Nope, not that one. Try that again. There we go. All right. So back to my Zoom and pick that screen. Slideshow. There we go. So can everybody see that okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. So what we're talking about for this Focus on Wellness is coming out, a process, not an event. Obviously coming out is that phrase that people use that happens to be a reference to coming out of the closet as if one was in hiding in the closet. And so this is part of our monthly Focus on Wellness. And what I put up here was kind of my own personal definition. There's some really great references that I'll give you later. And so, I'm really not going to read to you. But the process one goes through as they become aware of their own, this is the one I will read to you, of their own authentic expression and discuss this awareness openly with those that may or may not be aware. Could include a specific label or request to avoid those labels, and the important thing to remember is that coming out is an interaction or a series of interactions. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but the idea behind it being an interaction is that it's not a static thing, a static event, and it usually obviously is a communication between people. So there's some sort of relationship present, and the goal is to know what kind of relationship that is, and to know what your hopes are and if your expectations are realistic or not. And is this a process or is it a one-time deal, which for the most part it's not. So we'll move on and we'll explore that as we go. So certainly what it is just or perhaps how or as. So when people come out, they come out with their own authenticity with regard to their sexual orientation or possibly their gender identity, or as an ally. But what that really means is it could be whether they consider themselves pansexual or bisexual or lesbian or homosexual. And there's a bunch of terms, and it seems like the alphabet is growing, LGBTQIA plus. And in some ways it is, because people want to have words for their own self-expression and to label their own identity. Sometimes they don't want any labels whatsoever. And so being sensitive about that with regard to both sexual orientation, like the the controversy over being pansexual or bisexual, because there can even be stigma within the lesbian or homosexual community with regard to some of those terms. And so being aware of that and knowing what those different things are can be very important. And if we have questions, I can certainly try to address those as well. So gender identity obviously is going to be, do you identify as cisgender male, for example, which would be presenting as the gender that you biologically received at birth. That's not always clear at birth because there are intersex people as well, and then we have people who are non-gender binary, and so, or gender non-binary, I guess I did that backwards. And so whether they express as more masculine or more feminine, or and it's really a spectrum. And so that's not something that I specialize in personally, or have a lot of experience with. However, I know that using pronouns and being willing to accept other people's pronouns is a way that we can be an ally. And so how or as can you come out as an ally? Sure. And when somebody comes out with their sexual orientation or as an ally or with their gender identity, it's not set in stone. People's authenticity is not a static thing. It's part of who they are, and we all change and grow through our lives. And so those are things we need to be aware of as well. So moving on, what is coming out with regard to who or where? So obviously, one of the first things that happens is someone comes out to themselves. Sometimes it's very clear and there are no questions. But even if it's something you're aware of from a very young age, as you grow older, you learn to understand what other people's expectations are and where your personal identity fits in with the rest of the world. And so then we talk about things like self-hatred or internalized homophobia and those kinds of situations. But coming out to yourself or understanding your own identity, it would be a first step. And then having the cognitive awareness to be able to discuss it and know about it, because everybody's different. It's very unique. But coming out as far as having the discussion with somebody or presenting yourself in a certain way or giving yourself a label, you might want to do that in a more anonymous way, in safe spaces first after you've come out to yourself. For example, in a maybe in a coming out support group, or with your counselor, although that's not anonymous, or just being out in a social environment, lesbian bar or a homosexual bar, a gay bar, something like that. And there are other safe spaces, certainly. I mean, believe it or not, one of my first safe spaces was probably a gay AA meeting. So you never know where you're going to find your allies. Friends, your closer friends, they might have some idea of you coming out, or suspect that you might do that at some point. Coworkers, sometimes that's a professional choice. Is that something you want to do or not? And either choice is acceptable. It's your identity and your authenticity. And your family, that's one of the big ones that we'll talk about, especially when people think of coming out, they think of that big conversation that they have with their family, and that can be daunting. And then extended family. Do the grandparents need to know? Do they not need to know? Aunts and uncles. And those are all choices that you make. If these aren't people that you would let know you're having, a surgical procedure that might be a little dangerous because they're not that close to you, then maybe you might not want to share something about your authentic identity as your something as personal as your how you love or how you want to express yourself. So those are choices, and there are no wrong or right answers. And so in this space, there's coming out, there's a lot of decisions to be made, and they're your decisions. We will talk about the perspective of coming out from the other side. Part of the reason I have a passion for LGBTQIA issues, and especially around coming out, is that I have a lot of experience with it. I came out when I was toward the end of my first college career. It created a lot of cognitive dissonance and a lot of challenges for me, and including some alcoholism as one of my coping mechanisms as I was coming out. And so I came out, I was out 2 years, all my family knew, everybody knew. And then I met a woman, and there was definitely chemistry, and she was awesome, and we fell in love, and I decided to jump back in the proverbial closet for 27 years and was married. Then I came out again. In the interim, once my oldest daughter became a certain age, she came out to us as I'm pretty sure she would call herself pansexual. And she basically loves who she loves, and their gender isn't really an issue. So she is, for all intents and purposes, in a lesbian relationship, and I have a beautiful and amazing young grandson. He's almost 7 months old, and so that's really exciting and awesome. And so I do have that perspective from when she came out to us. It wasn't really very direct. It was kind of, no, I won't be bringing a boy home for Christmas dinner. We're talking at Easter dinner. It was more like, no, no. Well, it might be a woman. And so that's kind of how that happened. And it was very shocking. And so knowing what that's like from the side of a parent is another unique perspective that we'll talk about just a little bit in a minute. So the tension when someone comes out, because the reality is when someone does come out, when we look at the who or where, they've already come out to themselves, and they may have practiced coming out in those anonymous safe spaces, whether it's a bar or a meeting or a support group or whatever it is, or their closest friends or other friends who are gay who they feel safe with. And so that happens for them first, and it's a process there. And by the time they are ready to really undertake opening up to some of those closer family members, they may have built up some expectations. And so we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So here is when. This is a decision we make. And we make the decision to come out when we're ready. One day we may decide it's the day to do it. We also make little decisions to come out every day. Are we going to come out to the clerk at Kroger? Are we going to wear a pride shirt and respond in a very open way? Are we going to bring something up and talk about how frustrating it is that Target isn't carrying Pride merchandise in the regular store anymore? Because many of those conversations, whether we're an ally or a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, it's still a decision. Are we going to talk about that because we choose to, with a friend, with a coworker, with a stranger? Occasionally it's without deciding. One of my bigger coming out experiences was like that myself. I was outed by someone else, and it caused a fair amount of stress. It was very awkward and upsetting because it wasn't something I felt ready for. And I had been experimenting with my more anonymous, safe spaces. So, and it's ongoing. One of the things sometimes we don't consider is that we may make those decisions over and over, coming out when we're in a new environment, coming out when we're in a different space, whether it's in public or private. We meet new people all the time. So being straightforward, out and proud, and authentic is one choice, but it's not the only choice. Many people feel that the people they love and their sexual orientation is not for public consumption, that that's a private thing and it doesn't need to be everybody's business. And others feel like, hey, we need to step up and be counted. And I think both those things are very valid depending on who you are, where you are, when you are, and what your own decisions are. And so those are all options as well. So here are some things to consider. And I've kind of talked a little bit about some of these things already, but basically, so consider the relationship. Is it a coworker? Is it someone you meet and you're not going to spend any time with them in the future? And what's your motivation for wanting to step up and be your authentic self in that situation? You feel like having the conversation about Target, and so it's not really necessary, but it's not a person that you're going to spend a lot of time with, so it's casual, it's whatever. Or is it something more serious, someone you're interested in, you want to date, you don't know about them, a family member who has a particularly conservative viewpoint, or a particularly religious upbringing, and that they're probably not going to be very open and accepting. All those things are possible. Do you need to tell them? Do you want to tell them? What is your motivation? A big thing that I think we sometimes don't consider is, what are our expectations? Do we expect, is it necessary that every mother and every father has to love their kids because that's the way it should be? We know we get in muddy waters when we should ourselves, because should is a judgment word. So yes, in a perfect world, all parents would be loving and accepting, with no boundaries. And the reality is that over time, we create pictures of the future of our children in our mind, or our favorite cousin or our best friend. We get used to them in the way that we experience them, and the way that we have learned to expect them to be, or the way we expected them to be in the future. And so when we come out to them, are we being realistic about what their reaction might be? And have we considered that they might just need some time and space? After all, coming out was a process for us. Some of us, understood who we were very early on and were very direct about it, and many others weren't. And so if it takes some time to get used to for us, and we're living in our own body and our own mind, then it might take a little while, a little adjustment for someone else. And so, in the video clip, obviously, the dad used humor as a defense mechanism, and he also was really overwhelmed by the information. And if our expectation as the person coming out is that a mother or a father or a sister or a brother, if they truly love you, they will accept you no matter what. I believe that is probably true. In point of fact, chances are that they will come around to that even if they're struggling initially. That can't always be the case, I'm sure. But I think more often than not, it is. And so, so those are some examples of where it's hard to gauge what the initial reactions are going to be. But very often, after a little bit of time, people come around and they're able to re-express without that initial reaction, something hopefully more genuine and more kind and more caring. I'm sure some people will come off that way from the get-go. So that certainly is very possible. I think the big thing is to not have such strong expectations that you set yourself up to be resentful of their reaction. And we all need a little grace. You might need a little grace as the person coming out. You might need a little grace as the person that someone's coming out to. But really, you got to remember that, especially for the family ones, the best friends, the siblings, the moms and dads, and that kind of thing, those circumstances of coming out, these are relationships that really everybody involved wants to maintain. And being sensitive of that process and the grace that is needed on both sides is kind of like the way we talk about relationships and couples therapy, or Brene Brown videos, where being vulnerable in our relationships shows that we are trusting of the other person and that the other person can be trusting of us. So vulnerability is really courage and bravery, and that's exactly what the coming out experience with regard to those relationships is. So, all right, well, okay. So let me see. So then I have some resources for you. Certainly I can check on some questions and that kind of thing in a minute. But if you scan this link, if you scan this link, you'll basically go to a page like this. Human Rights Campaign has some great resources on coming out. I think the resources that I like the best are the Trevor Project resources. PFLAG has their own resources, including a list of coming out books, and PFLAG is parents and friends of lesbian and gay people, and they've been around for a long time, and lots of good resources there. There's some simple definitions, etymology of the phrase coming out and coming out of the closet and all that, all those, the history and the colloquialisms and some of the history of gay rights in the United States and those kinds of things. So that I felt that was interesting. I also have a reading list. A friend of mine that I participated in a coming out support group at the Montrose Center for a while. And Margaret is a friend who is also a counselor, but she volunteered at the Montrose Center and would facilitate the group when there wasn't an intern on deck to do it on a particular week. And she has a lesbian adopted daughter that we heard about quite a bit, and she has some great resources. She goes to a very open and affirming church, and so she has a big reading list of resources. Many of them are open and affirming, Christian friendly, and others as well. And so on her reading list, there's a bunch of really great stuff, and so I've included that as well. So all of these links go directly to those places, but the link on the page before will work for me. There we go. If you scan or click this link, it goes straight to that page that has all those resources. I just kind of listed them there for you. And this is just who I am. And I already explained that to you. I'll put it back on that page so you can see it. And we're certainly going to do some questions. And if you need more information, you can certainly call or text. And I just wanted to say thanks so much for joining us, and happy Pride. I thought that was really fun since this was a coming out thing. So I'll go back and leave it here for right now. If you need any of those other resources, please tell me. And well, let me see if there's anything in the chat. Thanks, Marcus. I appreciate that. So there's another link from Love Simon. I think it was one of the big advertising trailers, but it shows somebody says in the movie, it's not fair, straight people don't have to come out, and then they show people coming out as straight to their parents, and the one woman goes, "Oh Jesus, oh help me Jesus," and it's really funny because her daughter just said she likes men, and so it's just a funny twist on that, the whole coming out process. Oh, I see a new message coming. Oh yeah, don't forget to fill out the feedback form. That was from Marcus. We'd love your feedback about the wellness webinar that we presented tonight. And just know that the admin staff and all of the counselors at Edens are always here answer your questions and to be of service the best we can in any way. Any other questions? One of those resources that I really liked had a really awesome definition. And I think the most amazing thing is that coming out isn't really a one-time thing. This says coming out in order to live openly isn't something you do once or even for a year. It's a decision that we make every single day of our lives. Every coming out experience is unique and must be navigated in the way most comfortable for the individual. Whether it's for the first time ever or for the first time today, coming out can be an arduous journey. It's also a brave decision to live authentically. So, and there are tons of resources. That was the Human Rights Campaign, HRC. And the great thing about that particular resource is that there's information about how people use pronouns and different definitions of sexual orientation and representations of the different pride flags for the different segments of the LGBTQIA plus community. I know that there are a couple resources on that resource list as well that talk about ways to find supportive organizations, whether they're faith-based organizations or otherwise. And so there's Open and Affirming Church Search, and I forget what the actual name of the website is, but you can search for churches that don't just allow gay people in the doors, but who actually welcome them. And so that can be a game changer for some people who are dealing with more internalized issues. So I know we didn't have a huge crowd tonight, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Just type them in the chat. One of the other things that I kind of covered as I went through the slide I guess this one is who or where, what, how does coming out look to whom? I kind of talked about the stages of coming out. It's kind of an older concept. It used to be standard. First you have to explore your own thoughts and feelings, and then you come to a point where you understand yourself, and then you come out to yourself, and then start to come out to others. Well, it's all of those events probably do happen in a coming out journey, but they don't happen in a very linear way. So those things have turned out to not be so much as stages, like the stages of grief that follow one after the other. Okay, so we do have a question. I'm in Australia and would like to understand, do we ask someone about their pronouns or orientation? Do we ask them? I would say unless there's a standard in a work environment or the environment you're in that everybody will be asked, I would say probably not necessarily. If they have mentioned their pronouns before, or they have talked about coming out or being more authentic in their identity, and you just don't want to say something incorrect, I think probably the safest thing is to either assume and use they until they correct you, or you could ask if the conversation has already been brought out about in a general way. I don't think I would really ask anybody about their sexual orientation unless I personally, wanted to date them, or perhaps wanted to introduce them to someone for some reason. I think there are many ways to have conversations with people where you're talking in an open and affirming way about sexual orientation issues or gender identity issues. And so those things, if you're in that conversation already, a lot of those more individual details will come out. I'm not sure if that answers your question. I think it usually is upon the person who prefers a certain pronoun to share that with you. And people don't like to be caught on the questioning end as much. But you'll get a sense from someone who's very out and proud or living out authentically that they're happy for you to ask a question. But I think most of the time that's pretty obvious by the way they're speaking. So thanks for the question. I appreciate it. There are a lot of great resources about a lot of books about the coming out process for different people who've done that over the years. And so some of those resources are about specifically resources for people who are coming out and they want to see how that process was accomplished by others. And so some of those reading lists will include some of that information as well. But Trevor Project is hands down my very favorite website. It's got tons and tons of great information. And of course, it's set up as a LGBTQIA friendly suicide website, specifically for that population and targeting teenagers, as is Trevor Project's mission. But there is a plethora of additional information on their website that can help in all aspects of families understanding their teens and teens understanding themselves. And sometimes the research could just lead them to the fact that no, in fact, I don't think I'm queer or questioning at all. I'm cisgender and that's what I am. So, but it's very open as well about that. All right. So one more time, we're just about out of time, but I want to make sure that everybody fills out the feedback form. And I really appreciate you being here. And I hope you have a fantastic summer. I mean, I don't know if it's summer in Australia, but not sure how that works. Winter and cold. Yeah, I was thinking it was the hemispheres thing. So I'm just, All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And I hope you have a great weekend. Hey, so